Hello, everybody. It is Micha Green, DC and digital editor, and I am so elated to be speaking with Adrienne Brooks, who is the Director of Advancement for the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. We know that that museum, that building, and all the programming and collections in it is very meaningful for Black culture and American history and culture. But here at the Afro, we are highlighting first and few, and Black first and few in particular, in our We're Still Here special edition. And so we had to get NMAAHC up in this piece, okay? Because we know that you all are so groundbreaking in many ways. And of course, Adrienne Brooks is leading in this groundbreaking work. So without further ado, welcome Adrienne to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity to have this conversation. Of course, the Afro has been part of our lives, for generations, really. And so to be able to take part in this conversation is very exciting for me personally. And of course, what a great opportunity to tell the story of this museum.
Well, we really appreciate it. And, I, one of my favorite parts about the museum is learning about, things that are that resonate with me and what I'm passionate about. And I had not ever had an article in the Afro when I learned about the Afro, going to the museum and seeing your Black press exhibit.
Mhm.
And that's just one of the many things I love. All of our Afro viewers know I'm a theater geek. That's my original background. You guys, art stuff just makes me tingle because it's so good. And
Mhm.
so again, we really appreciate the work that you're doing, not again, only in educating the folks out there about African American history and culture, but also engaging us. And so, I think before we even get into the nitty gritty of the museum, I have to ask you because we're in the middle. Or rather, I'll say 2 years into. Hopefully, we're not in the middle anymore. Pandemic, but how are you? We forget to ask that.
Well, thank you for asking, and I am delighted to say that I have had my vaccine, I've had my booster shot, and I have been very blessed in not really having been touched by COVID-19 or its variations. So we're all coping. It's a new world, and lots of changes. But so far so good. And I'm knocking on wood as I say this because you never know.
Yeah, we're all knocking on all the wood, but yes, so blessed and so thankful to hear that you're doing well. And I know from our behind the scenes conversation that you're actually in your office right now, and so it's good to know that things are up and running and going. And so we're in the vein of first and few, of course. I'd love you to tell us about the museum, but also just like what's going on since the pandemic and this pivot that I know was necessary for all the Smithsonian institutions.
Absolutely. Well, the Smithsonian is very much committed to being open to the public. And so, even though, of course, in the very early days of COVID, we had to literally shut our doors for a little while, we were always working virtually. And, for me personally, there were some new learnings going on, how to do with Zoom, how to unmute your mic and remember to do that and all of those things. But we very, very quickly moved to a virtual environment. And so we were able to continue a number of our programs online. And we were learning as we go, but we figured it out. And our members, our donors, all of the people who care about the museum really came along with us and joined our programs. In fact, one of the things we learned was going virtual gave us a capacity to reach a larger audience in many ways than we could by holding programs in the museum. It just expanded the reach of our programs. And then, of course, putting them online gives us opportunity for further viewing and participation. So it's been a learning experience, but the museum very much saw itself as figuring out how to still be a resource to everyone, to the communities, and making sure that we were able to share our programs, throughout this whole period. Now, when we did reopen in May, I believe it was May of 21. Was it 21? But May of 20. When we did reopen, we had to go to a reduced schedule. And so typically our museum is open, and all Smithsonian museums are open 7 days a week, 365 days a year, with the exception of Christmas Day. And so, having that kind of presence, we're on the National Mall, and, we always get really millions of visitors each year. So what we did do when we reopened was to reduce our hours, and so we scaled back to 5 days a week, and were able to still accommodate with fewer passes, but still accommodate the general public as we were keeping up with the ongoing online programs and virtual programs. So we're kind of in a hybrid mode right now, and we think in many ways it might be the best of all worlds.
Awesome. And you mentioned that the museum is such an important resource for so many people. And so it's great that even in this new world, you all were able to pivot and now go into this hybrid to still be a resource to so many. Can you tell us a little bit about what it's like the having opened, this first Black, museum of this sorts? Tell us about the opening ceremony, and take us back to that, knowing now how it's become this great resource for so many.
Exactly. Well, of course, it's a day I will never forget, September 24th, 2016, because I had been working with by then I had been working with the museum almost 10 years. And so this was the day we were waiting for this moment where we opened to the public. So I can't begin to tell you the excitement that was building around it, and how wonderful it really felt that so many people wanted to be part of this opening. I remember many discussions in the Smithsonian saying, well, we'll just have a small program in the auditorium and, kind of virtually cut the ribbon and call it a day. Uh, we in the museum knew better than that. We knew our people really were waiting for this day. And so we did a strong outreach, and people were just excited. We filled the mall. We outside the museum, there were a sea of people, and it was such an exciting moment. We, went from the dignitaries, from the Barack Obamas, of course, and members of Congress, et cetera, to our regular everyday members who have been so important to this museum and making it happen. So when you see that vast array of people engaged and excited, the buzz was in the air. Of course, President Obama, he was still in office then, was amazing. And he spoke. John Lewis, who was one of the original, signers, one of the people who really made this possible by fighting for this museum. He was there. And of course, our founding director, Lonnie Bunch. So we had a stellar group. We had wonderful, from Stevie Wonder to Patti LaBelle. We had wonderful singers and marching bands, and it was just a moment one will never forget. And it was a beautiful day. It was like one of those beautiful September days in DC. And it was our moment. It was truly our moment, and everybody in the crowd felt that way.
And so, I see the excitement and the joy that still comes to your face in talking about that
Yes.
day. But
Mhm.
you had such a big role in that, and it's such a historic role in that day. Tell us about sort of how you felt at making all that happen, and what it was like leading this task in this cause, and what it took to sort of be in a role of leadership as a Black woman, um, sort of having to advocate for the value and worth of this museum, as you said, for a decade even before that beautiful September day.
Absolutely. Well, I will say my role, just to clarify for everyone, my role was to lead the fundraising campaign for the museum, and we had a pretty big price tag at the time. I think it started at 250 million, and then it went to 270 million. You know, prices have a way of going up, but actually, we raised well over 300 million to build the building. And so it was daunting to say the least when you just look at numbers like that, but then very exciting because people got excited about the idea of this museum. And, you know, there were those in the early days who said, yeah, I don't, you know, there's no money for this. I don't know that you'll be able to do it. And, you know, that kind of skepticism. I will say with the leadership of our director, Lonnie Bunch, who was the founding director of the museum, and his vision for this museum, we were able to go out and really tap into audiences, and a range of audiences. They could be corporate audiences and foundations. But what was most gratifying actually were the individuals we were able to tap into. And we had a founding donor program, which really looked at some of our larger capacity donors, million and above. And as we looked in the Black community, we brought donors to the Smithsonian they didn't even know existed. They didn't realize the wealth and the enthusiasm of the African American community for something like this. So we were able to, you know, engage those donors, and they too were able to engage their friends. So it was this multiple effect. But then also, I cannot say enough about our membership program. We began our membership program because we wanted to find a place for everyone to participate. So you don't have to be a millionaire. Obviously, you know, the bigger dollars help, but also the smaller dollars add up. And so, you know, we were able to do that outreach. And you know, we were extremely successful with our membership. People still have their charter cards, charter member cards, and are proud to say they were charter members of the museum. They were on board before we opened, and those were the people who came to the dedication ceremony and really fueled so much of what we did. So it was very gratifying, and you know, it's hard work and all of the things that typically come with any position one might have, but it was extremely gratifying, the response and the eagerness, and people found where they could give and made their contribution. They wanted to be part of this museum.
It's so cool to hear about how it, this museum came to be, and the work that it took to and still takes to keep this
Yes.
place going. And so, as the first director of advancement, I'm curious what that has been like, and what challenges and achievements you've had in the beginning and during your tenure. Because creating a role like that and being the first, uh, as I'm learning and doing all this research for this paper, takes a lot.
It does indeed. It definitely takes a lot. But I will say again, Director Bunch, he pulled together a great team so we could all work together and figure this out together. I often say we were, building the plane as we were flying the plane. So, a lot of it was just let's just jump in and make this happen. And, we had a great team of people we could call on to really, really lift the museum up. And as I said, once people saw it as a reality that this is actually happening, it's on the National Mall, it's part of the Smithsonian, it really had an energy that kept us all going in our darkest days when it gets a little, sometimes it gets a little, slow or difficult. But if you call on that energy of an enthusiasm that we so often saw, it really was the thing that kept us going. And I would like to say that now, I mean, I can't believe it's been 5 years since that opening. And that's been, exciting. Of course, as you know, fundraising doesn't stop. It's not as if we can hang up our coats and call it a day. But the building is built. And the question now is what's next? Where do we go from here? And that's often, obviously our membership program is ongoing, and we're looking to the future. And so now that the building is in place, we really wanted to focus on, the programs that are at the museum, because obviously it takes resources to have the kinds of programs we do. And also, we're looking to build our endowment, which really speaks to the future. We want to have a good size endowment so that we're able to invest that and then draw from it on an annual basis. And typically, Smithsonian allows 4 to 5% of whatever endowment funds one has, and use those funds to also supplement the programming and the work that is currently going on in the museum.
And so you answered this a little bit, but can you break down a little bit further, considering all of the pioneers and African American first that the museum features, those working in the building, etc. And how does sort of your work in philanthropy support American history through that African American lens?
Well, I feel our role, and believe me, you're seeing me right now, but I have a whole team, not a huge team, but I have a whole team of people, wonderful fundraisers, some who specialize in corporate, some that specialize in individuals, some, obviously focused on the membership. We have a back office. So we have a wonderful team in place that help make the funds happen and help make the fundraising happen. And so, we always saw ourselves as part of the larger museum story. And I know sometimes I used to hear, let me put it that way, I used to hear, oh, Black people don't give, and, it's going to be hard to raise money, and, all of those, kind of stereotypes that really aren't true. And one of the things I believe this museum did was to defy that stereotype. Absolutely, our campaign was driven by the generosity and support of Black people. Others as well. I always want to acknowledge that this has been a campaign that really has hit a diverse audience, which has been extremely gratifying. But Black and African American people of African descent have been critical. And I think that's almost a first as to how much this community has stepped up to make this museum happen, because it's a story that we want to have documented and shared for our future. Um, one of the things I would often hear when I would talk with potential donors is I want my kids to understand. My kids don't know this story or don't know enough of the story. And, parents in particular are always looking for a place where their children or their grandchildren could go to understand this story. And so that kind of energy and that kind of commitment for the future is also something that I feel is, it's not really a first for the African American community, because in very many ways we've done this kind of work, within our own communities, smaller, but on a national scale, this has really been particularly gratifying and very rewarding.
For sure. And I look at it as a first because it is, as you said, it's first of its kind, first organization. And so, and in that way, it's so great because the history of our Black culture, and of course in the museum, shows us that yes, we
Hmm.
can come together in many ways and make a
Hmm.
difference. But in this
Absolutely.
historic museum, I think your testimony to how Black people rallied together to get this museum built and for the people is really wonderful. Okay, last question, and I could really talk to Adrienne Brooks for days. So hopefully she comes back and sees us. But last question is, we're talking first and few. Of course, the museum has a lot of first and few. What is what's at least one of your favorite parts of the museum or museum's collections? That's a first for few. And did you sort of learn or have your own first or few experiences in that museum?
Oh, absolutely. And, I kind of fancied myself very knowledgeable in African American history, but honestly, I'm learning even today, every day. When I go in the museum, sometimes something will catch my eye. I was like, oh, I didn't realize that was there. And then I'll read the story or whatever. We also have a searchable museum. The digital aspects that we're strongly into now is really important. And we have a platform we call our searchable museum that allows, again, it's this virtual world where we allow where visitors can actually go in and pick up knowledge, see collections, and get a deeper understanding of the stories that are in the museum. So to me, I'm always learning, and there are many firsts for me as I go through the museum. But one of the things, and honestly, I would say, like I said, I fancied myself as knowledgeable about African American history and culture, but it's often those big, it's the Martin Luther King, it's the big names, the Rosa Parks, the names that, we're aware of. What the museum brings out are the everyday stories of everyday courage, especially if you go back, way back in history, back in time, the everyday stories that are taking place throughout our various communities, and our communities are different. But it's those stories that I think we find, and especially the stories of courage. I'll quickly just talk about the Joseph Trammell. There's an exhibit in the history galleries that shows a 10, we call it a 10 wallet, but it's basically a 10 box. And in this box, this man carried his freedom papers. And he did that because those of us, of course, who saw 12 Years a Slave know how, if a person of color were caught in certain circumstances, he or she could be grabbed and sent back south, and because we were all considered slaves. And so Joseph Trammell had earned his freedom and his freedom papers, so he carried those with him every day. And it obviously meant a lot to him. But what is really amazing is, because this was in the 1800s, that 10 wallet was passed down generation after generation after generation to the year 2000, 2010. I can't remember exact year we got it, but it was carried, through many, many years. And the family of Joseph Trammell brought it to the attention of the museum and said, finally, here's a home where we can share this story with everyone. And it's those kinds of stories, little stories, acts of courage that they're a first for me as well as some of the other brand names that we often hear about.
That's such a great story and so inspiring. And again, I think for many of us, it probably wants us to dig deeper into our family history and
Exactly.
our family tokens. And so, again, I love that you mentioned the Searchable Museum. That's something I'm learning about more with the museum. And I know the Afro hopes to highlight further. And so, thank you for bringing that up. But again, just thank you for your transparency and taking us on your journey and trajectory at this really important place to not only Black people, but to American history and culture.
Exactly, exactly. Well, thank you for this opportunity. Love to talk about the museum. So, thank you so much for letting us share all of this great information about our own history and, of course, American history.
Thank you so much. And you have to come back. This has been such a fun conversation. So
Great.
you
Thank
need to
you.
come back. Take care and take care, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate you.